The morning sun spilled softly through the kitchen window, casting long, golden streaks onto the checkered floor. Alice stood by the stove, flipping pancakes, while humming an old tune from her childhood. The scent of warm maple syrup mingled with the crisp scent of fall outside. It was a Tuesday, just like any other, and yet something felt off. "Jamie, breakfast is ready, sweetie," she called, her voice warm, hopeful. No reply. She frowned, turned the stove off, and walked to the hallway. Jamie's bedroom door was slightly ajar, the familiar creak greeting her as she pushed it open. Her son, 9 years old with shaggy brown hair and sleepy blue eyes, sat on the edge of his bed still in pajamas, clutching a pillow to his chest. "You're not dressed yet?" she asked gently, stepping in. Jamie shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "I don't feel like going to school today," he muttered. Alice tilted her head, confused. "Is something wrong? Are you feeling sick?" He shook his head. "No, I don't want to take the bus." Alice blinked. This was new. Jamie loved the school bus. He'd talk about the drivers, the kids, the jokes, the window seat. He'd always been the first out the door, backpack bouncing behind him. "Why not the bus?" she asked, sitting beside him. Jamie squirmed. "It smells weird, and it's too loud." His answers were vague, his tone detached. But it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. His voice trembled, barely audible, like someone hiding from a shadow that kept getting closer. Alice reached for his forehead. "You're not warm," she noted, trying to sound casual. "Did something happen on the bus, Jamie?" His grip on the pillow tightened, knuckles widening. "No," he said too quickly. "I just don't want to." A mother's instinct is a funny thing. It doesn't ask for proof. It just knows. Alice didn't press further. "All right," she said slowly. "I'll drive you today. But we'll talk more tonight, okay?" He nodded, almost in relief. That night, after dinner, Alice asked again, this time while folding laundry. Jamie shrugged off her questions once more. "It's just the bus, Mom," he said, avoiding eye contact. "I like it better when we drive." Alice didn't argue, but something about his expression, a flicker of fear when the word bus came up, lingered with her long after he went to bed. The next morning, it was the same. Jamie sat at the kitchen table, fully dressed, his backpack at his feet. "Can you drive me again?" he asked before even touching his cereal. Alice nodded, masking her concern. As she drove, she watched him through the rearview mirror. He sat stiffly, eyes flickering toward the window, fingers fidgeting in his lap. When they passed the yellow school bus parked 2 streets down, his entire body tensed. She noticed it. She also noticed the way he exhaled deeply once the bus disappeared from sight. Over the next week, Jamie refused the bus every single day. Sometimes he'd make up odd excuses. His shoelace broke, the driver was too grumpy, the windows let in too much wind. They were flimsy, too easy. It wasn't like Jamie to lie, especially not like this. And those eyes, they always darted away, like he was holding something back. Alice confided in her sister, who casually suggested Jamie might be getting bullied. "Maybe some older kids giving him a hard time," she offered. Alice considered it. She even called the school, asked Jamie's homeroom teacher if he seemed upset or withdrawn. "No," the teacher replied. "He's a bit quieter than usual, but he gets along well with the others. Nothing out of the ordinary." Still, Jamie kept insisting. "No bus," he would say each morning. Not a tantrum, not a protest, just a quiet refusal. There were no bruises, no torn notebooks, nothing she could hold up and say, "See, this is it." But Alice knew something was wrong. She began waking up earlier, just to watch the bus arrive from their upstairs window. Same driver, same kids, nothing unusual. Until Thursday. As Alice stood sipping coffee near the window, she saw Jamie peeking out from behind the curtain, his breathing shallow. He wasn't watching the other kids. His eyes were locked onto the driver. And in that moment, Alice could swear she saw something raw flicker across his face, panic. Like he knew something she didn't. That evening, she asked gently, "Jamie, do you not like Mr. Kirk?" The bus driver. Jamie's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "He's fine," he said without looking up. "He just stares a lot." Then, under his breath, "Sometimes he waits too long." Alice leaned forward. "Waits for what, baby?" Jamie's hands trembled. "Nothing. Forget it." But she didn't. That night, Alice lay awake listening to the wind outside, her mind racing. Waits too long. For what? For who? And why would a school bus driver do that? She made up her mind. She wasn't going to ask again. She was going to find out for herself. Friday morning arrived with an overcast sky, the sun struggling to break through the thick veil of gray clouds. Alice stood by the front door, pretending to sip her coffee as Jamie laced up his sneakers with quiet precision. He had woken up early again, already dressed, his backpack zipped tight as if preparing for a journey more serious than a simple school day. "I'll walk today," he said casually, not making eye contact. "The air feels nice." Alice gave a soft smile, her tone light. "Of course. Be careful crossing Maple." Jamie nodded quickly and stepped outside without another word. The moment the door closed behind him, Alice sprang into motion. Her car keys had already been placed silently in her coat pocket, shoes by the door, jacket unzipped for speed. She counted to 15 before stepping out, heart pounding in rhythm with the quiet thuds of her boots against the sidewalk. She didn't trail him directly, just enough to keep his figure in sight while staying hidden behind the morning busyness of suburban fences and hedges. He walked faster than she expected, cutting through side streets and alleyways as if he'd memorized every corner. But something didn't sit right. He didn't glance back. He didn't fidget. He didn't act like a child on his way to school. He looked like someone with a purpose, someone executing a plan. And then he did something completely unthinkable. He turned right at the old brick wall behind Willow Street instead of continuing toward Jefferson Elementary. Alice's pulse spiked. That path didn't lead anywhere. It was a back route, overgrown and lined with rusted fences. She followed him down the path quietly, stepping over broken branches and shards of glass, her breath catching when he finally stopped. In the distance, just past a patch of weedy brush and a long-forgotten billboard, stood a house. No, not a house, a shed, maybe once painted white, now barely held together by warped wood and weather rot. It tilted to the side like a crooked tooth, roof sagging in the middle, one shutter hanging from a single hinge. Jamie approached it as though it were sacred ground. Alice stopped cold, hidden behind a tall bush, watching as he knelt beside a small pile of stones near the steps. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a brown paper bag, carefully placing it under the stones before giving them a slight pat, like someone tucking in a child. Then, to Alice's absolute disbelief, he stood up and knocked twice on the wooden slats of the wall. A pause. Then a soft creak. The door opened a sliver. Jamie said something she couldn't hear, and a hand reached out from the shadows, thin, pale, trembling, and took the bag. The door closed again without a word. Jamie stood for a moment, head bowed, then turned around and started back the way he came, never once looking behind. Alice ducked lower until he passed, waiting until his footsteps faded before stepping closer to the strange structure. She felt her body tense as she approached, her skin prickling with cold even though the air wasn't chilly. The place smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. She could see nothing through the cracked window. Her breath caught as her foot stepped on something soft, a discarded child's mitten, faded pink, with a missing thumb. She stared at it, throat dry. Looking up again, she caught a detail she hadn't noticed from afar. On the wall near the doorway, someone had scratched letters into the wood. They were uneven, some carved deeper than others, but one line stood out stark and clear. "We stay quiet, or they'll take us again." Her hands trembled as she stepped back. She wanted to knock, to speak, to shout. But something about the stillness of that house held her frozen in place. Alice knew she wasn't ready yet, not without understanding more. She turned, hurrying back the way she came, heart pounding, mind racing with questions, and one fear louder than all the rest. What exactly had her son gotten involved in? And who was living in that house? Alice couldn't sleep that night. Her hand still carried the chill of the woods, and her mind kept looping the same three images: Jamie's bowed head, the door creaking open, and the gaunt pale hand that emerged from the shadows. That morning she had watched him leave again, same routine, same direction. This time, Alice didn't follow from afar. She waited. She needed him gone so she could go back, alone. By 9:10 a.m., her car rolled down the gravel path behind Willow Street, parked behind an overgrown bush. She wrapped her coat tight, shoved a flashlight into her pocket, and stepped toward the crooked house. No breeze stirred the leaves. The silence was unnatural, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Alice moved slowly, her boots sinking into damp soil. When she reached the front of the house, she didn't knock. Instead, she crouched near the window, its glass dirt-smeared and cracked. She cleared a small patch with her sleeve, peered in through the jagged opening. What she saw turned her blood cold. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through stained curtains and a single bulb hanging from a cord in the ceiling. Against one wall stood a series of shelves, filled with mismatched tins and cans, most of them dusty. In the center of the room was a small table with a chipped enamel surface. Jamie's brown paper bag sat on top, still rolled tight. A chair scraped gently as someone moved, and then a figure emerged from the darker corner of the room, a man. Or, at least, what was left of one. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s, but his hunched posture and hollowed cheeks made it hard to tell. His beard was long, tangled, flecked with gray and dirt. His clothes hung off him like old curtains, his skin pale as ash. He moved with a limp, favoring his left side. When he sat down at the table, he unrolled the bag with a care that made Alice's throat tighten. A sandwich, 2 juice boxes, and a small folded napkin with a drawing in crayon, Jamie's handwriting, childish and full of heart, scribbled a message: "Stay safe." The man stared at it for a long time before folding it and placing it inside a rusted metal tin. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, battered photograph. Alice adjusted her angle to see better and nearly gasped aloud. The wall behind him, covered in photographs. Dozens of them. Faces of children. Some happy, some faded, many of them familiar. Her breath caught when she recognized one, Lila Henderson, the girl who went missing from a birthday party 3 towns over. Another face beside it, a boy with freckles and an unmistakable red hoodie from a viral Amber Alert 3 years ago. Interspersed between the photos were laminated flyers. Missing, "Have you seen me? Last seen wearing." Alice's heart thundered. This wasn't just a collection. It was an archive, a memorial, or a map. The man rose suddenly and limped to the wall, touching one photo gently. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the image. Then he whispered something, inaudible through the glass. It sounded like a name, a prayer, a promise. Alice felt her stomach churn. Was this man a collector? A predator? Was Jamie unknowingly feeding a monster? Or was it something else? She looked again. None of the photos were defaced, none marked. There were no ropes, no locks, no cages. Just pictures placed with care, reverence, grief. Then the man moved again. He opened a metal tin on the floor and pulled out a small stack of notebooks, each one marked with names and dates. Alice strained to see, but couldn't make out the text. That was when she heard the soft snap of a twig behind her. She froze. A second snap, closer this time. Slowly, she turned her head and saw a shadow moving between the trees. The crack of a twig behind her sent Alice spinning around, heart hammering in her chest. But it was only a raccoon, its eyes glowing in the dim morning light, startled as much as she was. Still, her legs felt unsteady as she stumbled backward from the window, retreating quickly to her car. She didn't look back until she reached the edge of the tree line, and even then, the house remained motionless, cloaked in fog and silence. The drive home felt longer than usual. The morning traffic had picked up, and the mundane world of commuters and school drop-offs felt alien compared to what she'd just seen. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the sun had fully risen, and the neighborhood hummed with life. Jamie was already back, sitting at the kitchen table with a cereal bowl in front of him, untouched. His eyes lifted as she entered, and she saw it immediately. He knew she had followed him. She didn't say a word at first, simply walked to the sink, poured herself a glass of water, and drank it slowly, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Jamie watched her, his face pale, lips pressed tightly together. Finally, he spoke in a small, trembling voice. "Did you see him?" Alice set the glass down and turned to face him. "Jamie," she began, her tone firm but soft, "we need to talk about this. That man, that place. You can't keep going there alone." Jamie's eyes filled with tears. "Please, Mom," he whispered, voice cracking. "Please don't tell anyone." She moved closer, knelt beside him, taking his hand. "Sweetheart, I need you to be honest with me. Who is he? What's going on in that house?" Jamie looked away, his shoulders tensing. "I promised I wouldn't say," he murmured. "I told him I wouldn't tell anyone." Alice's voice dropped to a whisper. "Jamie, he could be dangerous. You could be in danger." Jamie shook his head quickly, tears slipping down his cheeks now. "He's not dangerous. He's sad. He helps the others. The ones no one looks for anymore." Alice froze. "Others?" Jamie nodded slowly. "Kids. They hide there. They're scared. Some of them, they don't want to go back." Her breath caught. "Go back where?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Home. Some of their parents were mean. Some ran away from bad people. He takes care of them. He brings them blankets. I bring food. We don't talk about it. It's a promise." Alice's mind reeled. "Jamie," she said gently, "if there are children in there, people need to know. We can get them help." But Jamie pulled his hand away and stood abruptly. "No," he cried. "You can't. If anyone finds out, they'll be taken." He said the social workers already tried before. Some of them got taken back, and they got hurt again. They trust him. They don't trust anyone else. His voice cracked into a sob. "I promised, Mom. If I tell," he said, "they'll disappear for real this time." Alice felt a sharp sting in her chest, as if every motherly instinct was being torn in opposite directions. On one hand, her son was a part of something dangerous, something clearly illegal, and potentially traumatic. On the other hand, he was protecting someone, several someones, who had already suffered more than any child should. She didn't push further. Not yet. That night, after Jamie fell asleep curled against his pillow, clutching the same plush dinosaur he'd slept with since he was 4, Alice sat alone in the dark living room, staring at nothing. Her tea had long gone cold, untouched. She replayed his words in her head again and again. They'll disappear for real. She thought of the photos on the wall, the laminated flyers, the hollow look in that man's eyes. Whatever this was, it was bigger than her fear, bigger than her son's loyalty. But she couldn't involve the authorities, not yet. Not until she knew the truth, the real truth. At 4:30 a.m., just before first light, Alice pulled on her coat again, grabbed a flashlight and a thermos of coffee, and quietly slipped out the door. The streets were deserted, painted silver under the glow of the street lamps. She didn't drive this time. She walked, her boots echoing on the sidewalk, step by step back toward the woods, toward the house, toward whatever answers waited in that silence beyond the tree line. The woods were darker at dawn than Alice had expected, the branches heavy with mist, and the air clung to her skin like cold breath. She moved silently, retracing the steps she had memorized in her mind, each crunch of wet leaves beneath her boots a reminder that she was crossing a line between the world she knew and something much more fragile. The crooked house appeared like a ghost through the trees, leaning the same way it had the day before, its walls hunched like tired shoulders under the weight of secrets. She approached it not as an intruder, but as someone seeking permission, heart thudding loud enough she was sure it could be heard. The front porch creaked beneath her weight as she stepped closer, flashlight in hand, though she hadn't turned it on yet. A strange, eerie stillness surrounded the place. Not dead, but holding its breath. The door wasn't locked. It gave way with a soft groan, revealing the dim, dusty interior again. Alice stepped inside slowly, her eyes adjusting to the lack of light. The smell of earth and decay had grown stronger, tinged now with something metallic, almost like rust. The room was as she remembered, table in the center, scattered tins, a worn chair, and that wall of photos that gripped the heart like of ice. But the man wasn't there this time. She moved carefully, her eyes scanning the floor until she noticed something she had missed before, a seam in the wooden planks, almost imperceptible, but warped enough to catch the faint outline of a hidden hatch. A rug had once covered it, now partially folded back. She knelt, heart pounding, and pressed her fingers along the edge. One board shifted slightly beneath her touch. Pulling it upward took effort. It groaned as if waking from years of sleep, and a musty gust of cold air spilled upward from the darkness below. Beneath the hatch was a narrow tunnel framed with decaying wood and dirt walls, leading steeply downward into the earth. She hesitated for a moment, then switched on her flashlight, its beam slicing through the pitch-black space below. Her breath caught. At the bottom, just visible in the light, were the faint outlines of blankets. Shapes. Movement. Alice lowered herself carefully, the old wooden ladder groaning with each step. Dirt flaked into her hair. She reached the bottom, where the temperature dropped sharply and the air grew still and damp. It was a large crawl space, no higher than 5 feet in places, with beams nailed together in an attempt to keep the ceiling from caving in. The floor was layered with old tarps, sleeping bags, and flattened cardboard boxes. A string of dim fairy lights, powered by a car battery, ran along the beams above, casting a ghostly glow over the space. And then she saw them. Children. At least 6. Maybe more, hiding in corners or behind old crates. They were thin, some barefoot, their clothes mismatched and layered for warmth. One girl clutched a doll, missing its eyes. A boy sat with his back against the wall, a comic book held tightly to his chest. None of them spoke. None moved toward her. But all of them stared, wide-eyed, frozen. Alice's heart felt like it had cracked open. She didn't speak immediately. She just raised her free hand slowly, showing her palm in a gesture of peace. "Hi," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm Jamie's mom." One child, a small girl with stringy black hair and scraped knees, stepped slightly forward. "You're not here to take us, are you?" she asked, voice so faint it barely echoed. Alice shook her head slowly, tears blurring her vision. "No, I didn't know. I didn't. I had to see for myself." The children began to inch closer, curiosity flickering behind their fear. Another boy, older and wearing a jacket 2 sizes too small, stepped beside the girl. "You're the first adult to come down here," he said. That wasn't him. Alice knelt carefully, resting on her heels. "Who is he?" she asked gently. The boy replied, "Mr. Charles. He finds us, keeps us safe. We don't talk about what came before." His voice cracked, and Alice saw the shadows behind his eyes, one she had seen in her own son lately. A third child emerged from behind a crate, limping. "You won't tell anyone, will you?" the boy asked. "If they find us, if they send us back," he didn't finish. Alice lowered her head, the weight of it all pressing on her shoulders. She wasn't prepared for this. No one could be. But she also knew this was no fantasy, no illusion. These were children with stories too dark to be spoken yet. And all of them, in some terrible twist of fate, were now her responsibility. Alice remained kneeling in the cold dampness of the underground shelter, surrounded by children whose faces carried more weight than their years should bear. Her flashlight cast a soft, golden arc across the dirt walls, revealing little drawings scratched into the wood, some stars, a crude house, a stick figure family with one figure crossed out. The silence held, suspended in fear and fragile trust, until the ladder creaked above. Every child froze. Alice turned instinctively, standing quickly and stepping between them and the entrance as the creak became a footfall, then another. A shadow descended. When the figure finally stepped into the dim light, she recognized him immediately, gaunt face, hollow eyes, that tangle of beard streaked with gray and dust. It was him, the man from the photo wall. The hand that had reached for Jamie's paper bag. The children exhaled in relief. "It's okay," one of the boys whispered. "It's just Charles." The man's eyes met Alice's, wary and exhausted, but not surprised. "So," he rasped, voice low and gravelly, "you finally followed him." Alice nodded slowly. "I had to." Charles gave a faint nod in return. Figured this would happen eventually. He stepped farther into the room, and the children instinctively cleared a small space for him, like orbiting moons parting for a quiet sun. He knelt beside one of the tarps, motioned to a crate. "There's a chair," he said to Alice. She didn't sit. "I need to understand," she said, her voice tight. "All of it." Charles nodded again, slower this time. "You should." His eyes flicked toward the children, who had returned to their corners, quieter now, but still watching with alert eyes. "Not here," he murmured. "Upstairs." They climbed in silence. Back in the cabin's main room, Charles gestured for her to sit at the table. He pulled a chipped mug from a shelf and poured lukewarm water from a thermos. The gesture, small and human, broke something inside her. She sat. He did too. For a moment, they stared at each other over the space between them, both unsure of how to begin. "My name's Charles Beckett," he said finally. "I used to drive bus 47 for Jefferson Unified. That was 10 years ago now." Alice blinked. "I think Jamie's school still runs that number." "Different driver," Charles said flatly. "They don't reuse the same names on purpose. Liability." He rubbed his hands together, knuckles cracking. "I got fired after the Henderson girl went missing. Lila." Alice's breath caught. She remembered the media frenzy, the theories, the blame. "They said you took her," Charles finished, not flinching. "I didn't." "Then why didn't you fight it?" she asked. "Why disappear?" He looked down, eyes hard. "Because they never cared about the truth. They needed a scapegoat. I was a single man. No family. Quiet. Used to bring breakfast for the kids sometimes. That was enough to paint me as the weird one." Alice studied his face. "So what happened?" Charles's hands rested on the table, palms flat. "Lila ran. Told me she was scared of her uncle. Said he touched her. I called the school counselor. She brushed it off. Said Lila exaggerated. Told me to mind my job. So I brought it to the principal. He smiled and said they'd look into it. 3 days later, They pulled me from the route. Then she disappeared. Next week. And guess what? Nobody looked into the uncle. All eyes on me. Police came to my trailer, took my computer, my phone. But there was nothing. You know why? Because I never touched her. I didn't know where she'd gone. Not until months later, when I saw her outside a truck stop near the state line, filthy, scared. She begged me not to turn her in, said the system would just send her back. So I didn't. Alice stared at him, the words digging into her gut like splinters. And the others? Charles gave a tired nod. They found me. Word spreads fast even among kids. 1 at first, then 2, then 5. Most of them had the same story. Parents who hit, homes that screamed, social workers who missed the signs. I started hiding them, feeding them. I taught them how to stay quiet, how to blend. I became what they needed. A ghost, Alice whispered. Charles looked at her, something sad and solid in his expression. No, a shield. The silence hung again. The only sound was the soft thrum of wind against the walls. You're breaking the law, Alice said after a moment, not as accusation, but acknowledgement. Charles's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. So are they, he replied. Every day those kids live in fear. The law fails them. He stood slowly, walked to the wall, and tapped a photo. That one? Bethany. 3 ribs broken by her stepdad. Her mom said she fell. The court believed it. Would have sent her back if we hadn't hidden her. He tapped another. Danny. Ran away from a foster home where they made him sleep in a basement with no heat. He still wakes up screaming. Charles turned back to Alice, voice softer now. You see monsters. They see safety. She wanted to argue, wanted to shout about rules and justice and procedures. But all she could think of was Jamie's voice whispering. They trust him. They don't trust anyone else. The next morning, Alice sat across from Jamie at the kitchen table, the silence between them heavy and fragile. The cereal in his bowl had gone soggy, untouched, and the spoon rested limp in his hand. Sunlight spilled through the windows, warming the tile, but there was no warmth in the air. Alice finally broke the stillness with a soft question. When did it start? Jamie didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the spoon, stirring absent-mindedly. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper. Last year, right after Halloween. He paused, then looked up at her, his face pale but calm. It was Lucas. Alice frowned, trying to place the name. Jamie continued, Lucas Grant. He was in my class. His dad was mean. Like really mean. The words came slowly, as if each one was being dragged out from behind a door Jamie had locked tight for months. One time after school, I saw Lucas limping in the hallway. He said he tripped, but I saw his arm. It was purple, and he winced when he moved it. I told Ms. Kane, but she just said he was clumsy. A week later, he stopped coming to school. Alice's heart squeezed, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. 2 weeks passed, and no one talked about him anymore. But I remembered. And then one day, I saw him behind the grocery store near the dumpsters. He was dirty and thin, and he was crying. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Jamie's voice cracked. He was scared to go home. Said his dad got drunk and hit him with a belt, and that his mom just watched. He didn't want to go to the police. He said they'd just send him back. Alice swallowed the lump forming in her throat. Jamie looked down. I didn't know what to do. So I remembered that weird house you told me to stay away from, the one behind the trees. He looked up again, eyes glassy. So I went. I knocked. And Charles opened the door. I told him everything. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded and let Lucas in. He gave him a blanket and soup. And Lucas didn't cry anymore after that. The silence returned for a beat before Jamie added, "Charles told me not to tell anyone, that if I did, it would put all the other kids in danger." Alice felt her breath hitch. "So you started going back?" Jamie nodded. "I brought food from the pantry, stuff from my lunchbox. Once I took a first aid kit from a bathroom. Another time I brought books. They don't have anything down there, no TV, no internet. Just drawings, old toys. So I tried to bring them stories." He managed a faint, bitter smile. "I even gave them that math workbook you got me for summer. They actually liked it." Alice blinked back tears. "You've been doing this every day?" "Almost," Jamie replied. "When I could sneak out early. Sometimes I lied about having clubs after school just to drop off stuff." He hesitated, then whispered, "One time I almost got caught. A man in a suit was driving by when I came out from the woods. I think he was a caseworker. But Charles told me to pretend I was just picking flowers for class. It worked." Alice placed a trembling hand over his. "Jamie, you shouldn't have had to carry this alone." Jamie gave a small shrug. "Someone had to help them. No one else was. And Charles, he's not scary, Mom. He's just tired. Like a grandpa who never got to retire." His voice lowered, almost ashamed. "I know I should have told you, but I was afraid you'd call the cops or yell at me. Or worse, make them go back to those people." Alice shook her head slowly, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "No, baby. You did the right thing. You did more than most adults ever would." Jamie wiped his own eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. "I just wanted them to feel safe, even if it was only for a little while." Alice's heart ached in ways she hadn't known were possible. She saw her son now not just as a child, but as a quiet soldier in a war no one else saw, carrying kindness like a shield, hiding pain behind sleepy eyes. She realized the drawings he had made lately, houses and trees, tunnels, children with wings, weren't fantasy at all. They were memory. They were real. And behind every crayon line was a promise. A promise Jamie had kept, even when it meant walking alone into the dark. Alice didn't sleep that night. After Jamie's confession, after the raw honesty in his trembling voice and the unshakable weight in his young eyes, she lay awake on the edge of her bed, staring into the darkness and trying to breathe through the storm of emotions raging in her chest. Fear, guilt, pride, sorrow. They spun together like a cyclone, each one louder than the last. At 2:37 a.m., she got up, pulled on her coat, and drove through the sleeping streets back to the crooked house in the woods. She parked further than usual this time, walking slowly through the fog, her heart a drumbeat that shook through her ribs. The door opened before she knocked. Charles stood there, backlit by the faint glow of the cabin's single light. "He told you everything, didn't he?" he said quietly. Alice nodded. "I need to see them again." Charles studied her face for a long moment, then stepped aside. She descended into the basement without words, her flashlight flickering slightly as she climbed down the creaking ladder into that earth-smelling shelter. The children stirred when they heard her. One of the older girls, tall and sharp-eyed, sat up immediately, her posture defensive. "It's okay," Alice whispered. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." The girl didn't move, but she didn't call out either. One by one, the other children emerged from their makeshift beds, blankets on crates, pillows stuffed with clothing, the thin padding of cardboard under their backs. Alice didn't speak for a long time. She just looked at them, really looked. Each face carried its own story, even if no words were spoken, bruises hidden beneath sleeves, eyes that flinched when someone moved too fast, shoulders that curled inward like they were always preparing for a blow. One child, a boy no older than 9, approached her slowly. "You're Jamie's mom?" he asked, his voice hesitant. She knelt, nodding. "Yes, I am." He swallowed hard, glancing behind her toward the ladder. Are you going to make us go back? Her throat tightened. Back where? To the houses, he said. To the people who yell and grab and lock doors. Alice felt her knees weaken. No, she whispered, eyes stinging. No, I'm not. Another child, maybe 12, stepped forward. I tried, she said. I told the lady with the clipboard, but she just nodded and said I'd be fine. She said I was imagining it. Then she left, and my mom burned my drawings. The girl's voice trembled, but she didn't cry. She had no more tears left. Alice listened as the stories began to come, not in order, not clearly, but in fragments, like puzzle pieces scattered across a storm. A locked attic, a food bowl on the floor, a father's belt, a mother's silence, a sibling who didn't come back from a foster home. Each tale chipped away at the fear Alice had clung to, replacing it with something raw and devastating. The urge to call the police, to call social services, to drag all of this into the light of a broken system. It crumbled under the truth. These children had already been seen, already been heard, and already been ignored. She sat on the cold ground, surrounded by shaking voices and wounded trust, and suddenly, she was no longer a visitor. She was one of them. In her mind, a memory returned, sharper than any nightmare. She was 8. Rain pounded the trailer roof like fists from heaven. Her father shouted in the next room, slurring, bottle crashing against something metal. Her mother, thin-lipped and cold-eyed, had simply stepped outside with a cigarette, letting the screen door slam behind her. Alice had curled in the corner with a towel over her head, whispering to a stuffed rabbit that things would be better someday. But they hadn't been. Not until she ran. Not until she got out. She had vowed that if she ever had a child, she would be the kind of mother who didn't look away, who didn't pretend not to hear the cries. And now, sitting in the dirt beneath an old cabin, she realized Jamie was the child she once dreamed of protecting. But so were these. Every bruised cheek, every voice that shook when asking simple questions, every hand that flinched at kindness. They were hers too. She looked around slowly, wiping her eyes, then reached into her coat pocket. One by one, she pulled out the items she had packed in the middle of the night: a bag of trail mix, a flashlight with working batteries, a bottle of chewable vitamins, a folded children's book. She placed them gently in the center of the room. I don't have much, she whispered, but I can come back tomorrow with more. A few of the children stepped closer, still wary, but curious now. A boy picked up the book. A girl crouched beside the bag of food. Alice watched as hope, fragile and flickering, returned to their eyes. Alice spent the following week suspended in a blur of decision and resolve, moving between the edge of caution and the weight of urgency. Each night she returned to the old house with supplies, blankets, canned food, medicine, coloring books, and each time the children greeted her with less fear and more recognition. They had begun to trust her, and she couldn't betray that. But she also knew this wasn't sustainable. Their world, no matter how carefully hidden, was still vulnerable. Charles never asked for anything. He watched her work with quiet eyes and the stillness of someone used to being forgotten. But when she finally sat him down with trembling hands and told him her plan, his face barely moved. They'll twist it, he warned, voice low and tired. They'll take what's true and stretch it into something monstrous. They might, Alice admitted, her heart pounding. But if we don't speak, they'll stay invisible forever. Charles nodded slowly, the faintest quiver in his jaw. Then make sure they're seen right. Alice reached out, touched his hand, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. The next morning, she sat in her car outside the local news station, hands sweaty on the steering wheel, a notebook filled with names and memories trembling in her lap. She didn't go in with allegations or sensational headlines. She told them about Jamie, about Lucas, about the drawings on the walls. She spoke in the voice of a mother, not an accuser. A woman who had stumbled onto something broken and chose not to walk away. At first, they didn't believe her. But then she showed them the photos, crayon messages from the children, scribbled words like, "Thank you, Miss Alice, and don't send me back." She handed over medical records she had quietly helped gather, bruises and old reports dismissed by overloaded caseworkers. And when she mentioned Charles Beckett's name, the reporter stiffened. He was suspected of abduction, the man said flatly. He was abandoned, Alice corrected, voice sharp. And he's the only one who didn't abandon them. Within days, the story aired. But it wasn't what anyone expected. No mugshots. No police car chases. Just soft piano music. A camera sweeping over forgotten photos and quiet woods. The headline read, "The Underground Shelter. One man's mission to keep lost children safe." The response was overwhelming. At first came the phone calls, then the volunteers. A local youth trauma nonprofit contacted Alice directly. Then came the lawyers, offering to help clear Charles's name. Within 72 hours, 3 families of missing children arrived at the station, eyes red and shaking. One boy recognized his sister in the footage, missing for over a year. Another woman claimed the name etched into the basement beam was her runaway niece. The shelter became a focal point, not a scandal, but a revelation. The news spread across social media under hashtags like #InvisibleNoMore and #NotJustMissing. Alice stood with Charles at the entrance of the cabin. As the first official team from the child advocacy group arrived, therapists, social workers, trauma specialists. No police. That had been her one condition. "We come in as helpers, not as saviors," she told them firmly. They nodded, humbled by the weight in her voice. The children were relocated gently, not taken but invited, each one accompanied by someone they had grown to trust, Alice, Charles, or Jamie, who walked beside them with quiet pride. His hand held by 3-year-old Marisol, the smallest and last to leave the basement. Charles stayed behind at first, his feet planted in the soil he had turned into sanctuary. "They'll need someone like you at the new place," Alice told him gently. "They need continuity." He looked at her then, his face crinkled by years of silence, and said, "Only if they want me." They did. Every single one. The abandoned basement was cleared, sanitized, redesigned. A new staircase replaced the rotting ladder. Natural light was routed in from a skylight cut through the floorboards above. The children picked colors for the walls, soft blues, warm yellows. One wall covered in chalkboard paint so they could draw freely. Charles's photo wall remained, but the flyers were replaced with current portraits, children smiling, no longer shadows in someone else's tragedy. And on the door to the new room, a plaque read simply, "The Quiet Haven for those who dared to speak through silence." The grand opening of the Quiet Haven arrived on a warm spring afternoon, the air laced with the scent of fresh paint, new soil, and sunlight streaming through newly installed windows. The building, once a silent refuge hidden beneath the earth, now stood proudly above ground, redesigned with love and intention, its wooden beams reinforced, and its interior reborn with laughter and color. Soft green banners fluttered in the breeze outside the entrance, and a small crowd gathered slowly in the courtyard, a mix of parents, advocates, therapists, neighbors, and the children who once lived in shadow, now dressed in bright clothes and holding each other's hands like constellations reconnected. Alice stood near the entrance, her eyes scanning the scene with disbelief and quiet awe, her hands clenched together not out of nerves, but to keep from crying too early. She wore a deep blue dress Jamie had chosen, and in her pocket was a handkerchief that belonged to her grandmother, the only adult who had ever shown her tenderness as a child. Beside her, Charles wore a modest suit, his hair trimmed, beard neat, but the same gravity still etched in the lines of his face. People nodded at him respectfully, no longer with suspicion or fear, but with reverence for the man who had given so much without ever asking for credit. The podium was modest, a single microphone, a small stage, and decorated with hand-painted signs created by the children themselves. Among them was one that read, "This is where we feel safe to grow." As the event began, a volunteer tapped the mic gently, and the hum of conversation faded. A tall woman from the Children's Legal Alliance introduced the speakers and gave a brief account of how the Haven came to be. When she finished, she looked out toward the crowd. Our final speaker today is not an adult, not a policymaker, not a director, but a young boy who reminded us that even the smallest voice can carry the greatest truth. She smiled and stepped back. Please welcome Jamie Bennett. Alice's heart squeezed as her son stepped forward. He wore his favorite green sneakers and a button-up shirt he'd ironed himself that morning. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled a folded letter from his pocket and approached the microphone. The audience fell still. Jamie unfolded the paper, glanced once toward his mother, and began to read. "Hi, my name is Jamie. I'm 10 years old. I used to think being brave meant keeping secrets. I used to think that if I told the truth, people I loved would get hurt. So I stayed quiet. I helped quietly. I walked quietly. I believed that was the only way to protect the people I cared about." His voice wavered, but he continued. "One of the first kids I ever helped was my friend Lucas. I found him behind a dumpster, scared and cold. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't just walk away. So I took him somewhere I thought was safe. And that place was Charles's shelter. It wasn't fancy. It didn't smell good, but it was kind. And in that little hidden basement, I learned that sometimes the people who seem invisible are the ones we need most." He paused and swallowed hard. "I didn't tell my mom because I was scared. Scared she'd get mad. Scared I'd get in trouble. But she didn't get mad. She listened. She believed me. She believed all of us. And she didn't just help me keep the secret. She helped us turn it into something beautiful." Alice felt her knees weaken as the tears finally came, slow and unstoppable. Jamie's voice trembled but didn't break. "I wrote this letter because I want people to know that kids see more than you think. We see the silence. We see the pain. And we see the love too. You just have to let us speak." He glanced up and smiled shyly. "I'm not scared anymore. Because now I know my mom will always stand on the side of what's right, even when it's hard, even when no one else does." The audience stood in a hush that felt like reverence. Then came the applause, slow at first, then rising like a wave. Alice stepped forward and pulled Jamie into her arms, pressing his head to her chest as tears soaked into his hair. She whispered through her sobs, "You did everything right. Everything." Nearby, Charles stood with misted eyes, his hand resting on the shoulder of a boy who once refused to speak at all, but now held a paper flower he had made for Jamie. Reporters captured the moment, but the truest images were already etched in the memories of everyone who had witnessed it. Inside the entrance of the center, where a blank white wall had once stood, the children had painted a mural, swirling colors, silhouettes of children holding hands beneath a sky of stars. In the middle, in bold hand-lettered script, were the words Jamie had chosen and every child had agreed upon. "We are not silent anymore." If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more real-life inspired mysteries that deserve to be seen and heard. What part of Jamie's journey touched you the most? Were you surprised by Charles's truth, or by how Alice chose to respond as a mother? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one.